Yeah, what I want to do is, now that we have one opinion about how, my big example is that Rambam over there in the second Chaylik about how talking about the concept of a chvayas hakoyach tivi that makes the child grow, for example, is better than talking about a malach with wings and fire that goes and does. We have to, and of course the real shorish of all this is understanding of God. This is why the theology and the psychology here really work together, because the Rambam psychology says that, or psychology and epistemology, right? The psychology says that the faculty of intellect, which is grasping things in the abstract sense of them, is better, it's clearer to the mind than getting things in the than imagining them. He thinks that imagination is just a messy thing, and doesn't get at, and most importantly, doesn't get at the essence of things. These two things. And therefore, when he talks about God, he wants us to very much, he doesn't hold of imagining God at all. He only holds of, he tries to retranslate all the terms that, even images that words use, he tries to retranslate them into concepts that don't really work with images at all. Yeah, Ad kan Shitas Haramba. Now, Shitas Harav, so Kimtos, Kimtos three things, right? So Kimtos, we have to sort of keep track of these three things. So Kimtos, number one, the faculty of intellect is higher, so to speak, right? If there's a hierarchy in the psychology, there's the faculty of intellect, which is higher than the faculty of imagination and memory and, of course, sense perception. Okay? As Kimdos, in his epistemology, that intellect is the only thing that gets at the essence of things. Nothing else can get at the essence of things, right? There's a side note in this which might be the most important thing or might not be, but it's actually more complicated. Ram himself says that it's more complicated. That intellect does not track reality. Imagination doesn't track reality, right? Because you can imagine things that obviously don't exist, so your imagination and the reality, and you can imagine things that can't exist even. So what's possible in the imagination is not the same as what's possible. In Seichel, you might be able to think things that happen not to exist, but you cannot think things that can't exist. It's a very big difference. And your intellect you cannot think something that if you can think of it, it could exist. It might not exist, but it could exist. So this is already ontology, right? And the third thing is therefore, right? Therefore, we end up with an ontology. Let's talk about metaphysics. I have three things. Number one is psychology. Number two is epistemology. Number three is the ontology, or the metaphysics of things, which says that the only thing that gets at the essence of things is the mind, and that is the essence of things. And the mind is the best way of getting at it, and the description, the intellectual way of getting at something is actually the best way of getting at it, because it gets at its existence and not at all kind of mikrim and accidents and things like that. Right? Theology, which is like the fifth thing according to what I just counted, is that therefore when we talk about God, therefore we could talk about the Avodas Hashem, which if you wanted to separate theology and Avodas Hashem, you'd say that the only correct way to talk about God is to talk about it in an intellectual way, in an abstract, conceptual way, not in an imaginative way, not in a form, not in a picture or anything like that. And of course this is what's known as the third ikir, as the God not having a body. So of course he thinks that that's true, but it's also, you see that it also matches with him. It's also best. This is an important thing. So the Rambam, it's not nebuch true that God does not have a body, and it would have been better for us that he should have a body, because like most people would say, like the Rambam himself would say, it would happen to poor people, to people that don't have intellect. They would say, should God doesn't have a body, because then I would be able to be mechaven better with tefillah. The Rambam says, no, you would not be able to, because you would only, your intellectual capacity to grasp things actually grasps non-bodily things better than it grasps bodily things. So that's the only best intellectual knowledge. So all these things match together, and therefore, if you want to talk about Avodas Hashem, the Rambam would not think that Dimion more or less. Of course, there's an exception to this, which is what he talks about in Pirkei Nevi'im. And that's another thing we have to track. But in the Rambam's view, imagination is not really what Avodas Hashem is. Just the opposite. He thinks that imagination is what Chazal call Yetzer Hara. There's a Pirkei about this, and I forgot where. because it's actually what causes all kinds of mistakes, and all the other passions and stuff actually exist in imagination and can't really exist in cycle to him. So that's his opinion. Now we have to that's Adkan Weissenspan. We have, what we want to know is that the Kuzri in all of these aspects seems to be mechilek on almost every single one of these 5 points, but maybe not on all of them, maybe only on like 4 out of 5. This is a very interesting thing to find out. So that's what we have to say there.
Yeah.
So the Kuzri also we could find in at least 3 different places in Kuzri where it talks about this. I want to focus on the most important one, which is the part of theology, which is also the source of, like, because I seem to prioritize that. But if you want to know the Kuzri, but it's probably important to track, and it's not clear that the Kuzri is as consistent as the Rambam in these kind of things. So he's actually a much more eclectic cipher in many ways. So it's hard to know about the Kuzri. And if you want to know the Kuzri's idea of psychology of the soul, of these different powers, you have to look at Ma'amar Chameshi and Osid Bais. He has literally a summary. He says himself that it's not Chadishim, and according to the Hantig Chachomim, it's just copy paste from Ibn Sina's letter on the soul, and he just goes through these different powers or faculties of the soul according to Avicenna's Sama's way conceptualization, which might be close to what Rambam said, or there's some differences, but this is what we have to look about for there. If you want to look at the Kuzri number 2, if you want to look at the Kuzri actually talking about Avodas Hashem and Koyach HaMedama, you have to read Ma'amar Shlishi. We should get to that because that's an important part, because over there it seems to have both the dangers of Medama and the mitzvahs of it, so to speak, how he thinks you should use it. That's in Ma'amar Gimel, in the beginning, where he discusses the Ish Chused or Ish Toiv, however you want to translate it. But I think that the place the Kuzri is actually the most different than the Rambam, and I think most people don't know about this, is in Ma'amar Dalet. So in Ma'amar Gimel and Ma'amar Dalet, the Kuzri tries to do theology proper. Talks about Ma'amar Gimel talks about midas, tchinas of God, what kind of tchinas we talk about God having and how. And Ma'amar Dalet talks about shaimas. That's what I'm going to use this translation. This shortest for me. But in the end of Ma'amar Gimel, he says, I'm going to talk about what the shaimas of God mean, what God's names mean. And of course, this is one of the most significant ways of tracking all of Jewish theology by understanding how they read Shaimas Hashem. Rambam also and Chelik Aleph and the Nian Samach talks about it a lot, and the Kuzri gives his theory of that here. And by doing that, he sort of shows how he has an upside down view of all these things on the Rambam. So we have to think like this. I'm gonna skip around, so you'll have to believe me that I know what I'm talking about. He says like this in Os Aleph. He says firstly the Kuzri makes a big difference between Shem Elohim and Shem Havaya, and the others. Ma'amar Dalet, beginning of Ma'amar Dalet. Okay, and we can just lie him. Definitely ending on the Zach anyways. Kuzri does like Elohim is Toya. I'm reading his translation. Shalit. What's his name? Shilat. Elohim is Toya l'Shalit. Elohim means shalit, or how do you say in English? Power, right? Someone who has what? No, that's not what it means. It means someone who has power over something. Right? It doesn't mean ruling in this sense. Okay, so for example, if we talk about, then it tries to get into different differences, why there could be a lot of different koiches, a lot of different powers, because talk about someone what controls or what has power over the entire universe. We talk about what has power over some parts of it, right? And we could say, and therefore, He talks about why him is Lishon Rabim, because every people used to think in polytheism that there's a lot of different powers, and therefore there's a bunch of powers working in the world, and you can make different slimim for each, and so on. And he tries to talk about the difference, why if there's one power above all of them, and what the Zura thought, and why they considered all the Siribi powers more than the, if there is one, is there one, or is there not one beside it. Gets it. And then he says, this is Al Shem Elohim. So in other words, Shem Elohim, according to him, is really what philosophers mean when they say God. Whatever is the cause of something, or the power on something, and so on. Then he says, Shema Nichtavit Kavuvka is a proper name. And we could signify it by its attributes, by ta'arim. Right? And Havaya is his proper name, but we cannot know him in a way of where he is or what he is, but we can speak about what he does. Then he tries to understand. So here he's doing something very weird. He's trying to do the exact opposite of what the Rambam understands, because the Rambam would understand that if you have an image, or I'm not talking about an image, but something. So he says, as ich da do in Asalef, the Shem Havaya is if I ask you, which God should I worship? Right? The Zayn, the Levune, the Stern, the Chvayz was the Maluch, and this one, that one. Right? And the answer is Hashem. Like Fassi, which person should I talk to? Riven, Shem Elavi. There's a Riven. So I'm not giving you a kind of person. I'm not giving you a kind of thing. I'm actually giving you a name, a proper name. And to him, that's better than having the concept of what it is. Starts the big difference. Then in Osbaiz, the Kizri fragt. The Kizri, how could this be known? What if we can't even signify it in any correct way? How do I actually know it? That's the big question, really, that he has to answer from this theory, right? Yes, okay. His problem is actually very different than the Rambam's problem, because this is a really very big problem. This Osba is really the biggest problem in the Kizri's whole system. Okay. Well, if you talk about now knowing something that you could conceptualize, the Rambam's God is actually very knowable, because you know exactly. It may probably exactly or not literally exactly, because it's not some random power. It has this whole thing of being the cause of all the causes, and therefore not a power that can be embodied and so on. But the Kizri's God is actually knowable in some sort of direct way, some sort of way, like I know Riven, as distinct from Sheminat. I could be miramis to him. There's some sort of essence, which is not the essence in the way that the Rambam thinks of essence. It's the essence, and it's very hard to know, because there's no real good way to talk about this unless you throw away the whole categorization of that we've been working with the whole time. Because to him, he says, to him, there's the question that Hashem Havaya answers is, which God do you worship? And what's the teretz? And so what does this question even mean? If you have the Rambam's world view, the Rambam's philosophical categorization, this whole discussion makes no sense. Because there can't be if you know what God means, you can't have a question which God. The question which God is nonsense. Because God, by definition of the koyach, not right. If you translate God, the word Elohim, as a power, of course there's 10,000 powers, but we're not interested in that word because all of them, let's say, are limited, or all of them, let's say, are in some sense in a body because they're created, or in some sense mitzirif, mirkif of koyach and poel, and so on. All of them are not what, since all of them actually need a cause in a more fundamental way, right? So what we, according to the Rambam and according to all the philosophers, what we mean when we say God is something that's actually categorically different from all those causes. So it's not really, doesn't make sense to ask a question, which power do you worship? And let's say even we answer the one above all of them. That's not a correct, that's like switching, you switch the category middle of the question. Right? It's not one out of the God that Rambam worships is not one out of many gods. That it would even make sense, and you could talk about him have a proper name. I don't know what Rambam's theory of proper names would be, but it doesn't really make sense to say which one, that one.
There's only one. There's no, yeah.
Exactly. To the Kizri, this sort of makes sense because he is trying to get at we could say, a more personal God. And what this means in the Rambam's view is it's not possible to match this into the system that we think with when in the Rambam's world. He's saying, I want to know God in the way that I know it even from Shimon, or I know it even as a proper name, Rabbi Yitzchok, not Yitzchok. And he says I could be meramis to Yitzchok by saying he's the one with a red beard, he's the one with such a color eyes and so on. That might be a way of me being meramis to it, but it's not what I mean when I say Yitzchok. I mean actually some sort of essence that is more directly to the thing, and that is, he sees the big difference between Shem Havai and Shem Elohim in having that kind of directness, not in being a different definition of God. And this is the really the thing that he says. So that's really it's not. I don't think it's possible to make this into a theology that works in some sort of philosophical system, but that's what he thinks. And therefore he has this question. The second us says the question: how can you know, or how can you know specifically something that can't be? You said I could just give you his name, but I can't show you what it is, or something like that. To him, that's a question. And the teretz is, read his teretz. Naas Gimel.
Yeah.
That's his language.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
It's all the same thing.
Yeah, okay.
Now, this is what does this even mean? Then he says, Rais are a bad thing. Why? Because Rais is actually what causes us to make mistakes. What kind of I don't know what this is supposed to mean. Alright? That's what it says. Who will cause us all the apikarsams Rais? So therefore he wants to get out of the whole world of bringing Rais. And he wants to cause a God which is knowable in the way of having a proper name. Shem Pruti. As I do in the Kizri, he's trying to another way. Really, what he's trying to do is he has this idea of a God of the philosophers, which is sort of a deistic God that doesn't which is some kind of version of some philosophical God, and therefore to him there's a different kind of knowledge, which is actually the prophetic knowledge, which that is the God that we can know by first name. And that's the difference between Shem Havai and Shem Elohim. But to him, Shem Elohim is what the philosophers know, Shem Havai is what the Nevi'im know. Right?
Yes.
Yeah? No.
Okay.
Was? Gibt's it? What? What I'm interested in is that he invented a new kind of knowledge as the first thing that he did. Stop. Noch da to sagen, he wants to get into the idea that only the Eden know this, and there's the need a Messiah for that ganz andere Teures. Und ich dran gehen die alle Teures. Right?
No, but
What I want to get
no,
at,
what are you saying that when you call somebody by the name, is you had this two aggressive siachs to
but again, if
I
you
have a name for this table, you know what I mean?
If you have a theory like that, a theory of names and a theory of categories that looks like Aristotle's theory, then Siachsis is something very small. It's very far from the essence of a thing. It's literally a category called Yachas, and he says like, okay, that's obviously nothing. Like, for example, since he's interested in knowledge of things as they are, or the nature of things, another way of saying them. He would say, the thing obviously doesn't change, right? This is why the Rambam says maybe there's a half a minute that we could do Ta'ariyachas to God because things don't change by having that. So therefore, knowing that is not even knowing that at all. Let's talk about knowledge. If you talk about knowledge, knowing my relationship to you is not knowing me at all. It's because the relativity, me being relative to you, something, me sitting on the other side of the table. If you go away, I'm going to stop being sitting on the table from you, but nothing will happen to me. So therefore, if you say, you know me by knowing which side of the table of you I'm sitting, you don't know me at all. You know something that's maybe the furthest thing from knowing me. So being able to have a relation is actually the furthest thing from knowing the thing. In the Aristotelian scheme of knowing.
Okay, well.
He is actually doing two things. Maybe what he's saying just makes no sense in that system. But what he's really doing is saying that he wants, like you say, some sort of personalist relation thing. And his big thing is that the philosophers don't have a personal God. And in order to do that, so we both had to turn upside down the ontology, the metaphysics of things, which I don't think he actually ever does correct in a consistent way. So I don't know what he would actually think about that. And another thing he has to turn upside down is, or not, I think he doesn't actually turn it upside down, he does something different. But at least he has to be mechadish a new kind of faculty. This is what he says. This is his language. There's knowledge which is through the eyes, so he doesn't like that because he thinks that eyes make mistakes. As if Nevi'ah nobody ever made a mistake. I don't even know what this is supposed to mean. If that's the kasha, very schwache kasha. The philosophers had an eye that, according to them, is also that God is the sun or whatever. Therefore, the whole concept of eyes is brutal. That's really the logic that he's using here. That's what he says.
That's not brutal. I mean, it's not as good as Nevi'ah.
And nobody that ever imagined that he has Nevi'ah. You could always define the true knowledge as some sort of different kind of knowledge, and then say I'm put from being done in your world. That's just a trick. Whatever this Re'eh Nevi'is is, obviously there are people going around saying that they felt the sun talking to them. Otherwise, they wouldn't be worshipping the sun. The people that are worshipping the sun here is a very interesting, weird story where the people that are worshipping the sun are philosophers, but they're obviously not. They're obviously the furthest thing from philosophers. After the mention was that are worshipping the one God are somewhat philosophers. The old of the Elilim didn't get to there from Rayas. They got to there because they felt that this they felt the sun talk to them or whatever. Let's assume. It's very funny.
You don't understand this whole business. I mean,
this logic of saying Rayas are a bad thing because people make mistakes. You could also say Nevi is a bad thing because people make mistakes.
Okay, this is a side question. Like you don't like his argument.
No, the logic just doesn't add up to me.
Okay, fine.
But
no, it's not whatever. So you don't like what he said. I mean, whatever. You saying that he also makes mistakes. I mean,
no, it could be it doesn't. It could be that by definition, of course. It could be that by definition, the actual direct knowing of something doesn't make mistakes. But how do you know that you have that, right? He himself has the answer to this question. You see, it's not like he doesn't have an answer to this question. He says that he has an answer to this question. He's not playing that game really. He does think he has an answer to this question. In other words, he thinks he could show you, for example, by the Eden having hashkucha or something like that. that shows that they actually have a way of getting their God to do things for them, which the philosophers don't have. That's his big raya. He doesn't actually just think that he just made this up. In other words, so that's why but that's not relevant to what I'm interested in. What I'm interested in is that he does have a new kind of epistemology, has a new kind of psychology, where there's something called Re'iyah Nevi'is. And Re'iyah Nevi'is doesn't mean that someone told me a story. I mean, like I said, at least could be means both the historical Nevi'im and the current Nevi'im. He talks about this a lot. Actually, he does think that. No, he thinks that there are. And maybe that would be a raya that my yeah, because that, of course, because maybe that would be a raya that mine is better than yours and so on. But the actual way of knowledge that he's promoting, he actually thinks. But that's just a raya. That mine is better. What he's very actually interested in, what he actually says many times, is that he thinks that people nowadays still have, maybe he thinks it's not as good as it once was and so on, maybe we need to have Nevi'im, real Nevi'im, we only have Shmacha Nevi'im. But he thinks that the way that you do Avodas Hashem is through some sort of seeing or tasting. Of course, this is 100 times.
100 times? Yeah. He loses to the drop.
Nein, sicher. Nicht das sind weinig. Das Sachen wegen dem, als wir können noch halt sehen, Gott. That's his whole big thing. And even, I actually think it's the other way around. I think even when he thinks about Mesoiri always says Mesoiri Shikir Iyas Ayin.
Right.
No, but by that he doesn't mean that it's such a good proof as seeing.
What?
By that he doesn't mean it's as good a proof as seeing. But by that it means that imagining it, which he explicitly says in Mamlech Shlishi and other places, is actually giving you some sort of direct knowledge of it, or some sort of sense.
That he talks about?
Of course. Also, and also many other places he talks about. There's different things that he talks about, where he keeps on talking about this ayin apnimis, or tefiyas ayin, or however you want to call it, internal eye, or internal seeing, or internal tasting, which is something that he is talking about. But Paul Mamish is not talking about it that a Novi had that once upon a time or something like that. He thinks that there is a kind of, again, you can have, he heard that he knows that there's such a thing as bringing rayas and so on, is far from knowing the thing itself. And to him, there's some sort of it's direct seeing. Well, a lot of different things. In 5,000 different ways. In 5,000 different ways, he has this idea that there is a sort of natural. That's what it says. It says in different places, in different ways. I'm just reading you this line. It says that God, the God as, and the important thing here is that it should be the God of his idea, and not the God of the philosophers, is not known by definitions and by eyes, but known by some sort of internal Re'iyah Rochnis. And what is this Re'iyah Rochnis exactly? So, if you go a little further, if you read the Hemshech of this shtickle, you see he says something like this. So this is really the big question this is why this Aspires question is really the big, and he actually repeats the question again in the Hemshech of this As. And he gives a more elaborate answer. And he says, how do we even merames to something that can't be said? And he says, and his answer is, first, he doesn't. One of the things he starts talking about is that when we talk about God, we often say, and he tries to make differences in different chimes that work in different ways relative to this. But we talk about where it was known, or by what it was known, which is not the thing itself. So the thing itself to him is known in a direct way by Re'iyah Nevi'is. And then he talks about, for example, people have seen God. He literally says that. And if you start, he talks about Udam Rishon, for example. Right? And he says, so in some way his answer is, we know God. How we know God? Because we say he's the God of Avram Avinu. But what do we mean by that? We mean the one that Avram Avinu saw. And he saw, how was it seen? By Mitzat Maisa. Okay, he literally says this. They saw him. So to him, the Nevi'im, the old Nevi'im, have seen God through, by mediation of what's known as all of these ways of God appearing to people, actually, which we read in the Bible about, right? For example, Shekhinah and all these things, and he tries, and he tries to not get into the philosophical discussion of how exactly that is God, but he does definitely think that that's not God itself, but he was seen by that, actually seen by that, because that's what he's trying to get at, that God actually is having some sort of masemat, some sort of a real connection with people, and he doesn't think that God's essence can be seen, but he does think that seeing the Urin, he literally says even the Urin is sometimes called Hashem, like Hashem means the Urin itself, that's his touch, and so on. That is seeing God, and now maybe if you don't see him, so you say, okay, whoever Moshe Rabbeinu saw, besides that's already second-hand prophecy, but he still thinks that that's the actual knowledge of God. And then he's really, so this is his theory, and it says that in 5 pages, whatever, it takes a long time to get through a lot of examples and a lot of things, and that's what Ishalahim, all kind of different things and different shimas and different ideas. Tachlis is that you can talk about these kailim, you can talk about these things as God himself, as seeing God. Not, see, the Rambam would say maybe it's an eye on seeing God, maybe it's you see God as shkocha, so you see all kinds of different ways. He tries to not, in the beginning at least, he tries to not define it. He tries to just say that the knowledge of the traditional God, the knowledge of the prophetic God, is a knowledge which is seen in the prophetic sense. And if you'll ask me what he saw, I'll answer you, he saw Kavod Hashem, or something like that, something that's where God has shown himself to him. And we could, in language at least, allows us to call that seeing God. Although that's not seeing God, but maybe by seeing that, you actually saw God in your mind, in your heart, in the real God, the essence of God. That is really his theory, I think. And then, if you go a little further, you see him trying to define this in a better way. And it says like this. If you go a little further in this shtickle, it says like this: something like that. After he goes through all different shamas and he says all these different pshutim, he says this whole theory of shamas and kailev rishonim needs to. He says we need to elaborate. That's really what he needs to elaborate is this problem that he just said, that you could see God and you can't see God, and you see God internally and you see God externally by the kailim and different things by which he is seen. And he says that this needs to be explained better, right? That's his language the whole time here. He's talking about place. I don't know why mukim is the exact the word. He doesn't understand either. But how could we signify something that's unknown? So in other words, he's trying to have his cookie and eat it too, right? He's trying to say that when we say the Shekhinah, we mean God, but we don't mean the Shekhinah. For example, if Moshe Rabbeinu, let's forget about God, talk about the Urin, something that's definitely the Nivra, right? And to him, all these things that he talks about, Kov and all these, they're Nivruim. But since God is revealed by them, I mean, when I say I saw God, I mean I saw that, and by saying that, I literally mean I saw the God, the Sibir Shana, not I just saw some thing that caused me to think that I saw God, or that caused me to imagine that I saw God, or that caused me to understand that there is a God behind that, which is what the Rambam or the Rasag would say. Right? There's a very big difference, probably the biggest difference than his. He's sort of going with the theory of Kavod Nevri here, but the biggest difference in his theory and the Rav Sadigon's theory is that Rav Sadigon wouldn't say, probably, maybe he would, but that doesn't say that seeing that is seeing God. He's seeing that is seeing something that causes you to understand that God is here, or causes you to understand that God is acting here. In other words, there's still an inference going on, that really God is known in inference, not in the direct seeing, right? And he really says that this is really what I mean. And when I say Al-Hai Avroam, I literally mean God who Avram Avinu saw, and that is how I know the God. That's his big thing. And he says like this. Now he says, I'm going to try to give you an answer. Okay? Got to learn that language. Okay? So in his Akdome, he goes through the standards, or more or less the standard idea of epistemology, of how senses work and things like that. And then he tries to make an analogy to what he wants to see. And actually, this is the place where he gets to this the most explicitly. He says, I'm not feeling good. So we know that senses can receive these accidents of things, right? It doesn't see the melech. It sees the mushal how big his thing is, and if it sees so it's, you could see your cycle tells you that you've seen the king, but the chish actually saw only accidents that are on him, right? And so on. And not only that, when he talks to you, you're not really talking with his body, you're talking with his cycle or nefesh daberes. And really, this soul of the king, it doesn't exist in space, so it's not a physical thing. But you already spoke to him and said that it's the king. Right? And if the king is dead, you see his body, you know that's not the king. That's the king's body. It's just some things that the king was using. The king is really the soul of the king. In the same way, before that, it was the king. I think this example is very, very interesting example. Because again, he's using it in a very different way than anyone else would use it. Because to him, when you see the king's body, you do see the king. At least when he's alive. When he's dead, he's not gonna. The king is not there anymore, so you don't see him anymore. But in the same way, he says, when the Unan, for example, when God is in it, so to speak, as maybe in some sort of relation like a neshama and a gif, then you are seeing him. Of course, you're not seeing. The seeing is not him, because what you're seeing is his accidents. But the cycle, then he says that cycle does that chish, but he doesn't cut these things apart in the way that the Rambam are cutting them apart. Again, because to the Rambam there's only an inference. When you see a person, you could do your philosophical calculation and know that this person must be caused, so to speak. The power acting in him must be a soul, and so on. Then when you see a person, you actually see his soul. Although, of course, what you're seeing is not his soul. And this is what he said. And if you go and then he gives another mushal of the sun, which looks one way, and we know by cycle that it's somewhat different. And then if there's something that's only cycle like maluchim, then the cycle could see it directly. Alvos chaleine, ashram tchile bekoich leisam shekoim belili, rei efshelem lamed alamitas adverim elbetach bilas yotra Hashem is alle beskilas vekoiches hinchi bechishem asim lemikna bechishem came into bechol hamin. Right? V'afal pi, v'lechan yachkin then, right? V'afal bli shlata arma eile neshlul metzlasech liyazik zeh be'ien shkan lekach nem nerai al cheftzayni so over here, he is saying that it's somewhat only sort of a raya. But it's not a problem, because we know that the chish might make mistakes. Like the chish gives the example, like I'm looking for one thing and ask someone that can't really see, and he sees something that's different, I understand that he's really seeing what I'm looking for. Right? So in the same way, the cycle that's looking for the essence of God or of anything else, and the chish tells him, look, I saw something that looks like this and like this and like this. And you understand that he saw God, so you actually saw God. He muchal reis, but this is reis. We kein, this is them. We kach achish and we koich am dam eins la cycle. And now we have now this is the next shtickle where he gets so Adkan is really standard Aristotelian epistemology, but I think there is a difference in that he thinks that you're seeing a body of a person is actually seeing the person, which is not something that anyone else would allow you to say.
Okay.
Now he wants to go further and make an analogy from this to what he wants to call the Chishanista. It's like this. Right? Just like there is this yachas between me seeing the essence of a gashmistic thing in my mind by you see he has this yachas, he has this, he thinks like this like mamish, it's like sort of a magic, like it's direct, it's more direct than anyone else would say. And he said the same way kanes chaken lusm yachas ben achish haniste v'inish anani gashmi v'som lemishem roim mebrief eines teres roy dvurim ba'atzman b'li chilef v'yovi mehem asayich l'raya l'inen dvurim hem v'toicham. So he says, just like some people, you people have senses, and from that your cycle tells you that you saw not what the senses saw, but what is behind them. In the same way, some people, which are neviim or so on, see in an with some internal, with hidden senses, things by themselves, and from that the cycle knows that what he saw, although it doesn't look like that, but it's what he saw. And so on. Okay, and now here he says something even more radical. So what does this even mean? He's talking about something, so you could be saying something like this, that you could see things with your eyes and understand that, and you could see things in your without seeing them with your eyes. Is that all he means? And then he says something else. So you see, now this is backwards. Because so then he says, maybe this internal eye that I'm talking about is really just the Koich HaMadam. But what he means is, this is based on what he says in Ma'amahai, that Koich HaMadam can be subservient to the Koich HaSichli and can be different from it. If the Koich HaMadam is imagining things that can't exist, then it's just being Yetzirah. And he says himself in Ma'amah Gimel that you have to deny that. But if the Koich HaMadam is imagining things that, or at least being in some way being helpful to the intellect, and there he says that's what Neviah is, suddenly. Maybe. It's Shemu, I weiß nicht. So this is a very weird thing, because if you want, so then what's this Ein Esteres? Then there's no Ein Esteres at all. Then Ein Esteres is just your very fancy way of saying Koich HaMadam. So then there's no difference between him and the Rambam, if you really mean just that. I think that he's really a whole time trying to say that there is an internal sense, and what he really wants to get at is that this internal sense might also be seeing forms. In other words, it might still not be seeing essences, but just like you understand that when you see physical forms, you're seeing the essence, you should understand that the Lowy sees some image in his mind, he's seeing the essence. But that whole thing is happening in another level of this whole structure. That's the Chizuk. Himself doesn't know exactly what it is. It says Efsh is the base, Efsh is the sense. Okay. Yeah, and then he says that eyes that all the Nevi'im see the same thing, so therefore we know that it's true. Gaiva is where he got this idea that all the Nevi'im have the same images. I have no idea. Sometimes he has eyes that are like just the opposite of the reality. Every Nevi has a different picture. What is he talking about?
They talk about the same God.
Nachamol, that's the cycle. Himself, you can't. He says, just like we know, everyone agrees that the dvash is sweet and pekia is bitter. And although you can't see sweetness and bitterness, we know because we agree on it, right? That's not a cycle attribute. That's literally a thing. How do you know that they taste the same? We seem to all agree, so obviously there's some objective truth behind this, right? He says the same way. All the Nevi'im agree on some things, therefore we can trust their internal senses, right? That's his big thing. He's trying. Okay, we have to. Well, he's very long, and then he goes into saying that the big problem with the philosophers is that they never saw Nevi'im and so on. Al-Tzoyres Tachlis says I'm not clear what is actual, because this is here is being mispalmos with philosophers, so he's not trying to give a really positive theory. I don't think all of his proofs seem to be very schwach to me. But the important thing is that he tries to say, and this is what I am getting from this. He thinks that he wants to have at least an analogy with sense perception more than anything else. What he wants to say is, you and me see this, and of course we might only see the attributes. I agree with the philosophers on that, but we are also seeing the nefesh. That's a big difference in him and the philosophers, because he thinks that you're seeing almost maybe the betzirif cycle and seeing that the same way a Lowy saw, maybe not in a physical way, he didn't see it, but he saw in his Mara Neviah, whatever that is, he saw some image. And we have to ask how we know that he's not making a mistake, but let's bracket that problem, because that's another secondary thing. And by seeing that, he's understood that he saw God. So he saw God the same way I'm seeing you and I see your neshama, same way Lowy saw Unana Anani Akovid or Chvais Merkovzi Cheskel and saw God literally. That's his big thing. And then we have this little shemu that really throws a wrench into the whole system, where he says that maybe when I'm talking about a Nevi'im seeing God, it's really another way of saying the Koyach HaMadam working correctly, which is something that the Rambam and others have toyed with. Maybe there's a possibility of the Koyach HaMadam representing things that are in Zeichel and so on. Okay. Now we have to see the next in the next us. If you skip and by the way, this is the important thing. Therefore, here is the most radically against the Rambam's idea of Afshuta, and he says openly that we're supposed to see God by the images that are given in the prophets and so on, and you should imagine it when you read it. Not like the Rambam would say that when you read Merkov Zechaskel, do not imagine no horse with fire. You should imagine no horse with fire. Of course, God is not a horse with fire. It doesn't say that God is the guy on the chariot. But he does saying that you should see that in your mind and know that that is an image of God. In the same way that when you see me, you know that I'm an image or a body of my soul. You see that and you know that's the body of God. In an analogous way, yes. In representation, no, and not only in representation. In Halbushav, yes, and it kind of he does use the word body and soul. He said that God is to the world as a soul is to a body and so on. He uses all this language. He does not afraid of that. This is a huge difference, and this thing I think very at least openly. What? No, he's not into being machik shom at all. He's into being the kid is not into being machik shom. The kid is into being doesn't care about it at all. And read the next article, you see, he cares the opposite. He's interested in being machik philosophers. Because he thinks that philosophers, because their whole way of thinking, and this is where we have to get, is not based on actual interaction with God, they're not getting anywhere. And therefore he thinks that you should see God. Of course, of Zoifat is a mask of the philosophers, that just like when I see you, I don't literally see. There is more than, but I do see your soul. And the same way you could see God. And of course God isn't defined by that. That's okay, so maybe God can take on whichever form he wants. Just like his king can take on whichever levish he wants. But it's still seeing the king when you see him with his levish. And therefore, this is a big difference in the case. I think most people, the Rambam has so totally conquered Judaism that most people even read this Kizna and don't realize what he's saying. But he says to me very openly that you should imagine God by reading these descriptions or by doing he talks about Shir Kaima and Master Merkava. And he says that's helpful. If you'll imagine Shir Kaima, you will get a better understanding of God or more Yiras Shamayim and so on. Since the Rambam has so totally conquered everything, we tend not to do this. But this is definitely what the Kizri believed. And possibly the Ravid also and many other nice, worthy Jews. And then he says, if you read the next article, you'll see Ober Kizri, as Dalit. I don't know why I'm feeling so. If you read the article before that, it finished. We have to read that. Lefikach liyakshav leruch kol ma shneim atfinas Hashem yamet veris lahayisrol v'masem ekov afil lashir koyme lemash yash b'zeh mikonis merod b'nefesh k'moshem b'vayiristos. He says, and these are literal. And he's like, what do you mean? We can understand that and it's better. And he says, no. He says, those taras hafilsofim. But what I see from the reality is that people are more afraid from physical things than from stories about them. And he says this, and he says even the total opposite to my example of counting. I don't know where he got this from. Again, whenever he gets to the reality, he says things that are totally not my experience of reality. He says, even if you want to count at 100, you're going to need to start using words. You can't do it in your mind. He literally has the total opposite idea of been describing the whole time that how do you call it? That the intellect knows things in a much more precise and much more useful way than imagination. He says no, the intellect needs imagination to be able to work. For example, it's very hard to count until 100 in your mind. It's easier if you say it, and probably you would say it's even easier if you write it down and you use mamish a pastel vitamin, right? And this is the whole shtickle says this, and therefore he says that no philosophers have Havira, only Nevi'im. And if we don't have Nevi'im, then we trust the philosopher, the Nevi'im side. That's a secondary thing. I'm not interested in that part. I'm interested in the internal understanding of his. I think that this is the biggest. If this us high is not me, that language that I read last week, Lemushla, where he says that from seeing images you don't get anywhere. Only very stupid people, because he is basically taking the side of those stupid people and trying to prove that they're right. Yeah, because he even thinks that this is the big difference in Avodah and the Mishkan and all of that, because he even thinks that the Eigel is a legitimate thing, only was done the wrong way.
Right.
Because he thinks he should have an image to use. And he thinks that us having a Bes Mikdash or even a Bes Knesset and so on are just images of God. Like we say, when you're Mishtach for the Bes Knesset, you're Mishtach to God, right? What does that even mean?
Right.
What?
Kind of, yeah.
Nicht kind of.
No, he doesn't think
Nicht kind of.
Like Eigel, you know.
He definitely does. He thinks that the whole difference is that it's the correct way of doing it and it's not correct way of doing it. Yeah, that's what he says. You're so Rambam influenced that you can't imagine that someone literally didn't have this whole problem. And I think that the real shayrish is that he thinks that like this. And it's a good question who is right, but that's... that's already another whole shala.
Here. Okay. Fine.